Hey there, folks. Been making fine progress on the sprite work between other obligations. We got some really interesting new assets recently, but we'll be looking at their sprite sets some other time. I want to talk about sound design today. I'll be working on Audacity here in the background while I discuss the subject. I'll dissect the pieces of these new voiceovers for y'all after I elaborate on the units they're for. Even though it's a very basic real-time strategy game we're playing around with here, that remains a huge factor in modding it. I mean, think back to the loot sound in World of Warcraft. The jingling of gold, the shuffling of a pack, the thud of an item being dragged and dropped. Sounds can easily trigger memories. As long as it's distinct and leaves an impression, it'll stick with people. Sound design is a vital component of the identity of a project. I guess a closer comparison would be another RTS game like Warcraft 3. Specifically the unit quotes. Work, work. Zug zug. Me not that kind of orc. In the original Dune 2000, unit quotes were done for the most part based on faction, like this.
Ready. Reporting. Awaiting orders. For the Baron. As you wish. Harkonnen out.
Very simple, right? Radio noise, pause, speak line, radio noise. But it's certainly memorable. The downside is, this system is built for the 3 playable factions in the original game. If you're playing another faction, or a new faction even, you're kind of out of luck. You'll be stuck with the Ordos voiceovers by default. It's very immersion breaking. On top of that, we can't have layered voiceovers in the sense that, say, Command & Conquer 3 does, where the voiceovers are their own audio file.
Size matters.
And extra stuff like the radio blips, background noises, and so on are cut in or out by the game. What you hear is what you get. 3 files for selecting the unit, 3 files for giving an order. That's it. Dune 2000's sequel, Emperor Battle for Dune, has an infamous system where, although all of its units have unit-specific quotes, there's a group selection thing where a bunch of units respond together, and that takes precedence. A cute idea, but it results in a lot of the same lines being heard over and over and over again. Let's go! Let's go! Let's go! And not a single Atreides unit distinguished itself. A pity, really. The unit-specific quotes in EBFT are generally pretty good, and they offer great inspiration at the very least. In my past Summer Solstice campaign, I decided I wanted to implement voiceovers based on unit type. That way, I needed only edit 6 lines for each unit, or even less if some units share certain lines, and they can be made widely varied as they don't have to fit a given faction's, aesthetic. They fit their own. Quite the endeavor that turned out to be nevertheless. I had to edit a couple hundred lines for the units, to my recollection. But there were over 1,000 in total, including all the campaign lines. Anyway, there do have to be some common stylistic threads between them, of course. More about those in a minute. For now, let me give you the rundown of these lovely assets we'll be looking at. I had a lot of wild ideas for this new faction native to the world of Arkanon, the Order of Aether Knights. And it's not quite reasonable to expect that all of them are feasible. 2 of the more unconventional concepts were swordsmen and naval units, each for their own reasons, which is why I was really happy to see them both implemented recently. Spritework is not my sister's area of expertise, but she kindly attempted it for the sake of creating a unique infantry unit. Its death, idle, and prone frames don't exist, those are placeholders, but it's in a great state for starters, and I've finally been able to use their fully edited voiceovers. Most were already done for the associated lasgunner infantry. The one new line they've got is this one.
My blade thirsts.
Yeah, that's the sound of an energy sword lighting up in Halo 2. Something I imagine would be slightly problematic to use if this were remotely a commercial endeavor, but I don't even monetize my YouTube videos at the moment. We're doing this for fun, so, we can take some more creative liberties and skirt the rules in places. We're probably helped by the amount of editing we're doing with the materials on hand, transforming the original components into something new. That's actually one of the reasons we can be certain Dune 2000 won't get a remake or something, and a bunch of nonsense won't get kicked up in our faces. It's in legal limbo because the stance of the Herbert estate is that old stuff should remain old. Anyway, here's just a bit more on the Atheris Paladin, and then we'll move on to the main course. The reason this concept was unlikely to come to life is because this game operates off the grid system. A so-called melee unit can't get close enough to its target much of the time to look like he's actually hitting it. He's physically restricted. My idea was that although it looks like a melee weapon, it's a high-tech, quote-unquote, sword, and has some more range than one might expect. That's how this worked out. It's less a melee weapon and more a hyper-stylized, short-range, handheld plasma cannon. Perfect for hacking armored targets to bits. See that projectile our voxel artist Psycho worked up for him? They make little energy waves. Very cool. As for the other thing, we got some boats. Dune 2000 takes place on a desert planet. We don't visit Caladan, there's no reason to have naval units or even naval unit logic in the game. It didn't exist until our developer, Klepacki, implemented terrain restrictions. Now, select units can freely wander on allowed terrain types, or are restricted to specific terrain types. Before that, we had to do some crazy janky workarounds to make so-called naval units work properly. Take this Caladan map, for instance. This is Feda's work, and you might be familiar with him if you've played Dune 2000 at all, because he created a well-beloved trilogy of campaigns featured in the mission launcher. Those being the War of Assassins or War of the Landsrod trilogy. This is one of those maps where the boats are literally painted on the map via the tile set. They don't move, you can't select them, they're just there to be fake and look pretty, like fake plants. Pitiful indeed. Now have a look at the shoreline here. We basically had to make it so that water was traversable to vehicles like the grass and dirt, but the shoreline tiles didn't allow either unit type to cross over to the other side. If boats were placed on the grass, they would be able to drive around like vehicles. The water allows vehicles but not infantry, and there's no terrain in the original game that restricts infantry and not vehicles. That's why the cursor shows a cancel symbol, but the boats are moving around. Shenanigans. Since there was no logic for this kind of thing, there was also no way to build naval yards on water. We had to drop naval yards on the water in the game editor, and they would just be there at the start of the map, and be able to build boats. There's also a separate system where carryalls, flying airships that can lift vehicles, automatically try to bring vehicles to repair pads. That game rule had to be adjusted so no carryall could go lifting a boat onto land. However, once Klepacki worked his miracles and that logic was devised, things became much easier. We could tell naval yards to be buildable only on this specific kind of terrain, water, and we could tell ships they could move on water, but not on land. That fixed the cursor problem and a whole bunch of other issues. This was first applied to flying or hover tech units though. It would be a while before the concept of naval units resurfaced at all. As you could see, we had some assets available even then. Kip, one of our very professional and super skilled players, drew that naval yard building and touched up those boats with faction color, although they only have 8 frames each. Kip is also responsible for drawing the water assets we have for Arrakis. Thelvadami Flippy put both the naval yard sprite, as some kind of new tech factory, and the water tiles to use in his Great Battle of Arrakis campaigns. Yes, I know, very heretical. The only place I put the water tiles to use was inside cave systems, where Fremen dwell. Still unusual, but players don't really expect to see such a thing on Arrakis, and some folks think it's cool. That is, that's the only place I put those water tiles to use until now. The concept for the world of Arkanon didn't include water at all at first. The early goals for the development of the tileset was simply mimicking the original game's basic pieces in a new style. But we had to contextualize the harvestable crystals somehow. We bounce a lot of ideas around while things are in development. They wound up being pink salts, and what pairs better with salt than water? Besides snails, of course. Adding all these water tiles fills up the tile set, although it didn't really save my sister any effort on all the other tiles that needed drawing. In fact, she did some subtle coloration to the water borders Kip recolored, adding a dull purple hue just like the cliffs of Arkanon have. So it amounted to a little more work for her. I did some work on the recolor myself. The sands of Arrakis and the salt flats of Arkanon have different textures, so I blended the new terrain style with the old to make it look seamless. In fact, I took it a step further and blended rock with the water edges too, which goes a long way in creating island variety. I'd like to try my hand at blending water edges into the bottom of cliff tiles too, at some point. As things progressed with the tile set, water became a much more important part of the setting of Arkanon, and my vision for campaigns on it. Hatred of the enemy is not valid justification for settling on a world after all. It must have something of value, especially if these humans are stubborn about staying where they're at and not interacting with the rest of the Landsrot, the rest of the known universe. Water is very valuable. Caladan spoils the Atreides, and on a world like Arkanon, it facilitates the Order's needs so they can pursue what they want. I asked our voxel artist for a fishing boat at some point, and I'm sure I'll map out farms for the Gracia trees here or there. I want to give the impression that these people live here. If the water is important for that, it's also got to be important to protect, right? That's where the naval stuff comes in. The weird factor in terms of gameplay for these new ships is that they're meant only for this one faction. The other factions are going to have to use hover tech to fight them or avoid the shoreline. If it's not obvious, I'm focused on the single-player setup. Multiplayer is just, I mean, we've got limitations of other sorts on the back end when it comes to multiplayer. I have campaigns in mind, so I'm purely focused on those. It's still important to balance the dynamics to what extent I can, so things feel fair and fun in-game, but balance between the factions is less important than fun. I mean, consider Red Alert 2's balance, or especially Yuri's Revenge. That game has some extremely wacky units, especially on the new faction in its expansion. Ask any of the multiplayer enjoyers over in that game. They'll tell you plenty about Yuri, I'm sure. But it's still a wildly enjoyable game, even in multiplayer, and it has an avid fan base to this day. So the whole asymmetrical warfare thing it's not fair at all, but I'm confident it will prove interesting, allow for more varied campaign mission designs, and be a unique and memorable bit of world building for this setting and this faction. Their naval units won't come into play for every mission, but where there's water, they can be expected to have a substantial impact. Speaking of limitations though, one of the other things that got in our way while drafting concepts for these guys was that we can't slap turrets forward or backwards on a unit. There's a Y offset so we can move the center up and down, but the center is always on the same X coordinate. In layman's terms, the average naval vessels don't have centralized guns. Because of game logic, however, the guns on these new ships needed to be either fixed or centralized. And our voxel artist hated that concept. Not only because of that silly limitation, but also because it's Dune 2000. We don't really deal with water here. It was very painful for him to draw them up, so thank you, Psycho, for indulging me. We deliberated plenty to reach a sort of compromise on the matter, though what I asked for was not necessarily my idea to begin with. At least, not strictly. Veda had plans for a naval campaign on Caladan and drafted up the gunboat, destroyer, and cruiser with guns, rockets, and artillery respectively. I mean, these archetypes were from Red Alert 1 to begin with, but Veda desired to use them, and he adapted them to Dune 2000. So I hope to maintain their armaments, or some elements thereof, in the new units. The armaments he chose for them, that is. When it came to the new voxels, I drafted loose concepts for each ship's overall shape, their armaments, some potential viewport locations, and so on. I gave Psycho plenty of creative freedom beyond those parameters, so he workshopped them himself until they were in a place he liked. We'd also discussed making hover-capable versions of these units so they could go to use elsewhere, but that's not in the works at the moment, even though I have raw takes for some of these units that would fit on a hover unit. The results are great, as you can see. We've got here the Machieri Corvette, whose prefix means Knife Lord. It's designed for close quarters combat and escorting larger ships. Besides its main cannon, it's got forward autoguns, making use of another feature Klepacki whipped up for us that allows us to fire weapons from the body of a unit as opposed to their turrets. It has a large viewport up on its main cannon and a smaller one on the body in front of it. His voiceovers are rowdy and looking for a fight. We'll listen to the completed edit shortly. The Colorato's destroyer is the medium-sized ship. Although it was drafted up with forward Gauss cannons, not a railgun, Psycho suggested trying the latter on it due to its shape and the placement of the forward guns. And I really like the idea because I want Machieri to be the most spammed unit. Railguns come with friendly fire risk, can have a lower firing rate so the unit is vulnerable to being swarmed, but the destroyer is still too solid, So I'm also giving electronic countermeasures to the biggest ship in the fleet that could throw off homing rockets. And I'll need to paint some blue on the forward guns just like the railgun tank has to sell its new weapon type. It also has a second viewport behind the rocket pods. Oh, and its prefix means virtuous destruction. As for the dreadnought, its prefix is Makrithmos, meaning distant roar. It's got its tri-barrel long-range artillery, a forward plasma cannon for self-defense, and those cute little guns flanking it are purely decorative because units can only have up to 2 weapon types. I mean, maybe we come up with some fancy custom scripting to use those later, but I have no idea how that'd work in practice, so who knows if we'll ever see that. Given how gigantic this unit is, it needed a lot of detailing. And it has 4 viewports, 2 flanking its sides, 1 in the front and 1 in the back. These naval units represent an entirely new classification in Dune 2000, so I've gone fishing for new background sound effects for them, just like I had to do for the hovertech units. Pun unintended. One of the background tracks we've been laying under these voiceovers in Audacity is ambience of the ocean on Earth, the roaring waters and a gentle breeze. Logically, much of this sound would be cut out by noise cancelling on radios, but this is part of my audio style. Being of 3 very different sizes and roles, their other background noises will vary even more. The Corvette being the smallest ship with a good speed, I'm thinking the sound of its engine could be heard in its bridge. I'm using the idle loop from the GDI Marv in CNC3 as general ambience for all of its lines, and for a louder and more active background noise under order confirmed lines, I'm looking at a sample of the airboat from Half-Life 2. More than that though, something amusing and unexpected guided its direction. See, I had a buddy do the raw takes for these lines in person, and we spitballed some ideas. Have a listen to this section of the recording session.
Deeper down?
Still energetic, but...
Like, where's the fighting at?
Where's the fighting at?
Where's the fighting at?
Like a drunken sailor.
Where's the fighting at? No, seriously, you want me to do it like, where's the fighting at?
Yeah, no, I mean a little
Where?
bit. Where's the fighting at?
Where's the fighting at?
Yeah.
Like that, okay.
It turned out that these takes were the most amusing and suitable. The thing is, the take that I wanted to use for "Where's the fightin' at?" had a thud in it where my guy accidentally bumped the desk. This is normally something I try to remove or splice a different take in to get rid of, but in this case I kept it because I had the idea that the boisterous crew of the Macchieri would be snacking at the command table, and probably on fish. So instead, I recontextualized the thud around the end of the take by having jostled cutlery coincide with it. That's a sample I extracted from an early scene in Demon's Roots. Hey, look, that's a real game, okay? I was skeptical too when my friend recommended it, but he was insistent, so I gave it a look, played it for the plot, for realsies, unironically, and now Polka is my favorite character in all of fiction. What can I say? A Kaimato cook, even if I curse his name for the cruel extent of the things he made me feel. But that's besides the point. Doing up these voiceovers is just an excuse to revisit and reference things I love. Playing around with that take gave me the idea to have some crewmen laughing in the background of another take. So we've got the human and dwarf male laughs from WoW in one of these lines too. The Destroyer and Dreadnought are less likely to have engine sounds coming through in the bridge, so I was at a loss at first on how I wanted to approach them. We need a very different kind of ambience. When it comes to infantry, they tend to have howling wind, footsteps, the shifting of weaponry or shuffling of packs in the background of their lines. The average vehicle has some kind of engine noise. Even if it's a weird noise for stuff like hovertech, it's still identifiable as an engine. There's the idea that these two can use control room noises behind their lines, but that's kind of generic. We can do better. It made me think back to Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, a very janky old game with some pretty memorable sound design. I booted that up and went and revisited a couple of areas, the Marsh Refinery, the Cutter Urania, and took samples of ambient noises. Those samples show up in the larger boat's lines. Ambient noises are needed more so for the unit reporting lines. They take a back seat to something more active, something conveying motion in the order confirmed lines. A loud engine rev would be strange given the other background audio on these units. So what I'm doing instead is taking some short ambient samples, like great machines winding up, and using them as active noises instead. A couple of tweaks to the volume here or there, and we can have it seem to kick in closer to the end of a unit's line. Yep, there's a lot that goes into these, but these are heard hundreds of times. It's important to pour love into them so the players love them too. Some active or short ambient noises end before the radio blip, But if they do need to be cut off, I put brief fade-outs at the end under the radio blip to soften it. Not literally soften in terms of volume, I mean I don't want it to cut out instantly, since that tends to produce undesirable noises out of speakers. Ditto for cutting in, of course. It may seem like a very tiny and inconsequential thing, but I'm speaking from experience here, you know. The audio's gotta be compressed for Dune 2000. Stuff that won't come through in Audacity will be interpreted strangely by the game. The ambient noises fade in very quickly, starting from mid-intro radio blip, and as compared with those original Dune 2000 lines from earlier, my style leaves longer delays at the end to let the background noise be heard on its own, for just a moment before the voiceover ends. We don't want it to overstay its welcome, but we do want a short delay before the next line begins. All in all, that should wrap things up. Let's have a listen to what we've got here now, shall we? First, the Macchieri Corvette.
Where's the fighting at? Need an escort, Commander? Macchieri Corvette. What's up? Corvette here. What's up? Let's flank 'em, sir. Take us in close. Before you know it, we'll bring it there. Occupying the area, sir.
Rowdy bunch, ain't they? That was the first time my buddy tried his hand at voiceovers. He's got a knack for it, don't you think? He is officially credited by the name Der. All lowercase D-E-R. What a lad. Next, the Catarettos Destroyer.
Send us to the front. Catarettos on station. Destroyer on station. Naval superiority. All hands on deck. All weapons ready. All weapons at the ready. As you command. Steady as she goes. We will take the area. None will defy us.
Driven, focused, defiant of any and all odds. Stalwart, resolute. At the risk of going on a small tangent, this is the same VA who did the new Sardaukar lines, killing_you. Although those came out quite differently. Here, have a listen.
Your command? We are Legion. Elite troops reporting. No surrender. They will know fear. Death before dishonor.
I need to go back and add some more variety to the Sardaukar unit reporting background noises now that we have some new variants. Those were done up for riflemen. Need the rocket launcher and flamethrower versions done up. But yeah, he sounds pretty different, huh? When it comes to selecting voice actors and stuff, I don't like to give people too much direction. Instead, I look for the person whose voice I think will naturally best suit a certain unit. Sometimes I work with folks with voice acting experience, or who do it casually for their own hobbies. Other times, it's nothing more than the kindness of a friend. As long as the right voice is chosen, and as long as I'm judicious about my takes and editing, the player is unlikely to recognize the difference. I'll give you another example. Have a listen to the original Saboteur lines.
Yes, Commander. Yes. I'm ready. With pleasure. Oh, yes.
The person I chose for redoing these lines, a very good friend of mine, has a naturally raspy voice. It's because of his condition, you see. His vocal cords are physically weak. Not that he's a bad actor or anything, but what I mean to say is that acting was less required for him to do some takes for this unit. Here's how the new lines came out for the Saboteur.
Stealth operations. Death is inevitable. Our purpose is sabotage. Chaos unfolds. Saboteur going eagerly.
He nailed that sinister laugh, didn't he? Music to my ears. Whatever editing I do, it all hinges on the raw takes. He gave me some beautiful stuff to work with there. Pardon, it's interesting to hear some units done up in the past and contrast them with my latest work. But let's wrap this up now, shall we? Here's the compilation for the Machrithmos Dreadnought.
Offshore artillery. This is the Machrithmos. Machrithmos standing by. This is the Dreadnought. Bombardment coordinates. Ready to bombard. Pride of the fleet. Engage from afar. Adjusting accordingly. Re-evaluating combat zone. Eyes on the horizon.
There's a bit to say about these too. The raw takes on these lines, as compared with the Corvette and Destroyer, were very quiet and came with some background noise. Audacity is pretty good about removing background noise given some dead air to sample, and simple compression and amplification will fix the volume level. Still, it's much easier to fix low volume than it is to fix high. where the audio peaks over the track, cracks, and breaks up. It does, however, come out sounding different than if the raw takes were done at a higher volume, or a volume more consistent with the raw takes for related units. That said, the play in this case was actually to leave the background noise in. It blends quite well with the sound of the ocean, which ultimately drowns it out. The tinniness of heavily noise-cleansed lines is hard to hear after all the editing, but it stands out more than regular background noise against the ocean. This is the nature of working with such a huge variety of microphones and recording setups. The splash of reverb I add to the voiceovers helps disguise the difference in quality between quiet and loud raw takes. That's also the other reason for background noise in my audio style, its consistency where the raw takes can be highly inconsistent. Even between takes from the very same VA, something as small as how far he leans back in his chair or what room he chooses to record in can transform the qualities of the raw takes. Do you remember the, "My blade thirsts" line from earlier? Same VA as the Dreadnought, Klepacki. Here's the full compilation of Aether Knight's lines for comparison.
Yes, my lord. Yes, Commander. We stand ready. What is your wish? My blade thirsts. Lasgun pride. We advance. Yes, my lord. Yes, Commander. Death to the weak. As you command. It shall be done. By your will.
Yeah, pretty different, huh? It be how it do. Well, I hope this brief peek into the back end of my audio design has been enlightening. There's a lot that goes into these projects. Crazy as it sounds, spritework is the least of it. And there's also a lot more spritework to show, but I might do some mapping in the next devlog now that we've got Atheris Paladins. I wanted them to show up on the first Imperial Sardaukar level, and here they are. I no longer have an excuse to wait. In the meantime, I'll just keep doing what I've been doing, and besides, working on myself and trying to regain my strength, I'll keep it up with those sprite sets. They'll get done eventually, there are just a lot of them, that's all. And I keep getting screwed by my condition at the most random times and needing to take more time to try to correct that crap. It's the worst. Alright. That's all for now, at any rate. Thanks for watching, hope y'all have a good one. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.